Now that we've seen how to bring authentication in from the start, just like we did in previous iterations of ASP.NET, let's look at how we can take an existing project that does not have authentication and add it in later. So let's select our ASP.NET Core Web Application, hit Next. We'll call this Add Auth Later, and add app at the end of the solution name. And we're going to select Web Application, .NET Core, ASP.NET Core 2.2, no authentication, leave the rest the same, hit Create. Now that we're in here, we have our application. If we run this, let's just kind of see where we're at to begin with, which should be a standard project, just home and privacy. There's no authentication here on the right. So now we want to add authentication to our app. It used to be that the way to do this, really actually suggested from people who use this a lot and do this, was to create a new project with authentication and then copy the settings over to your existing application. Not a great system. It's gotten a whole lot easier. Right-click on your project and say Add New Scaffolded Item. Now, instead of a normal Razor page or something like that, go down here to Identity and select Identity and hit Add. Now, this may look a little intimidating because there's a lot of options here. But the basic ones are easy. Leave it all alone and it just works. So I'm going to change a couple things here. First of all, this section right here at the top is where you select your layout page, just like any other template. We're going to leave it blank, just like every other template. Next is the overriding files. We're going to not override any files this time. In the next video, we'll look at what this does and how it works. Now down here, we can select a data context class. You may say, what is that? Well, that's for your entity framework. We can hit the plus button here and just leave it alone, and it names it pretty good. I mean, we've got the addAuthLater.models.addAuthLater context, which it's about right. So hit Add. And user class, we can hit plus next to that as well. And addAuthLater user is probably fine. That indicates they're a user of this system. You can name it different if you want, but I'm going to use the default name here. The final option, one we didn't get previously, is use SQLite instead of SQL Server. Let's go ahead and check that. So it's going to use a SQLite database instead of the full SQL Server database. Hit Add. And it's going to bring that scaffolded information in. It's going to update our application. And it says, please install the following packages to your project for scaffolding and identity. And it wants the entity framework core.SQLite, which I believe is already here. If we hit Add again, it's probably going to give us that same error. This is a bug I found in Visual Studio, because if you go to dependencies, NuGet packages, it should have that entity framework. It does not. Okay. So let's add a dependency on that entity framework core. So go to Browse, entity framework core.SQLite. There we go. Select it, install it. So again, this should go away fairly soon. It should just add it automatically when we're doing this. But if it doesn't, just follow this process. And then once you've done that, come back, right click on your project, go to Add new scaffolded item, identity, leave the top information alone, hit the plus, and then check the box for SQLite if you would like SQLite instead of SQL Server. We hit add, it's going to build out our project or our code, and then it gives us a few things we need to do since we have added it later. The nice thing is, first of all, half of these things are already done, but it's good to check to make sure. Second, what we do have to do, we basically just copy and paste. So let's do that. So first, we need to check to see if we have an app.using static files in our configure method. Where's that? It's in startup. So not configuration, but in our configure method, use static files. We already have that one. Next, we need in our configure method, again, after static files, we need to app.add authentication or use authentication, which we do not have. Therefore, we'll add it. And again, that was a copy and paste from their directions. And then the generated UI requires MVC. So using some MVC parts, even though this is a Razor app project. So in our configure services method, we need to make sure that services.addMVC is there. So our configure services, we need to make sure that services.addMVC is there, and it is. Now ours is services.addMVC.set compatibility version. That's okay, because it's add the MVC to the services. It's just also add the compatibility version. And then make sure app.useMVC is in our configure. Right down there. Now, it does say, hey, you're going to need to do, it uses code migrations. Make sure you run either these commands at the command line or these commands from Package Manager. Let's use Package Manager. So I've got the Package Manager console open right here. It is in the View menu. And I always lose where it's at in here, but it is in here. It's in Other Windows. And it's right there. So Other Windows, kind of halfway down, it says Package Manager Console. So you open that. Our entity framework, we've added our login system, everything to our page. So let's now go to shared layout. And in layout, we can see here that we have our authentication in place. So we have our login partial, and I'm looking for it in here. And I don't see it, so we might have to add that. But let's just run IIS Express and just check to make sure. Sometimes it's hard to see in the code where things are, but yep, sure enough, the login partial is not being called, so we haven't called our identity page yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So there's our login partial, which that has 2 list items in it. And what that does is it adds these 2 list items to our menu. Notice right here we have these 2 list items. So index and home. So we can say partial and the name equals underscore login partial. There we go. Let's run that again. And now we have register and login. Now I didn't use the same formatting they did. They have the formatting that pushes it all the way to the right. We can add that if you want. But now we have register, which looks the same. We have login, which looks the same. We have forgot password, looks the same. We have register a new user. It's all here. So it's the same system. It's just that we add the authentication to our application later. We had to do a couple of tweaks, but for the most part, it's just baked right in. It just works. Just like before, we have our areas, which has identity in it. And we also have now this folder called migrations, which is our entity framework migration information. So that's how you would take an existing application and very easily just add your login system to it.